Happy Tuesday, everybody. I am coming on live today with a special guest. Her name is Coach Emily, and she is a sexpert. And so I'm excited for the opportunity to be able to interview her, talk with her, and get her thoughts on deconstruction and how sex plays into everything with that, from purity culture to where she's at personally. And so she's going to be joining us in just a second. Hello, Blair. Good to see you as well. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate everybody that's already hopped on as of now. And so we will get this ball started, or rolling, I guess you should say, in just a second. I see that she's just come online, and I'm excited for you to meet her. Hear what she's doing and how she's making an impact on people's lives in an area that for a long time, especially in Christianity or any kind of religion, was seen as taboo. And so I'm excited that she's going to be here to explain the advances that she's made personally and professionally within her life. And so I see she's just come on, so as soon as she joins us, we will get started. Once again, her name is Coach Emily. She is a sexpert, and she is dynamic with what she's doing and the freedom that she brings to women and men when it comes to exploring their own sexuality. So, with that being the case, I am looking to see if I can get her online here, and seeing if we can get her all hooked up as soon as she requests to join. Just give us a second, and we will get started in just 1 second. So, let's see here. I hope everybody is having a good week, and just want to let you know a few things that are coming up on my end. I am currently working on having a podcast come out here soon, so I'm excited about that. Also, if you... Oh, there she is. Let me get her in here, and we will get... So, I'm looking forward to talking to her as it connects. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm okay. I didn't see your notification come up on my phone, so I'm like sitting here waiting. I'm like, why isn't it coming up? What's going on? So like, anyway, it's fine. I'm okay.
It's okay. I was just talking to me, everything like that. I'm so happy you can make the time. I know you've got a lot going on.
Oh, no, it's okay. I needed a break from moving anyway, because did you know that moving is stressful? I didn't. I forgot anyway. So I'm like,
the top stressor in life is moving.
Oh my God. But we finally got our couch yesterday. We have the last of the furniture coming this week. So I'm like, thank God that we can actually get back. I got actually like back into my morning routines like this last week. And I was just like, I feel so grounded. This is amazing, because like the entire last week was just like fucking ridiculous. I'm like, oh my God. But anyway, I'm glad to like finally get back into routines, be able to talk to you today. I'm really excited. Yay.
Well, I was just letting everybody know a little bit about you, but would you go ahead and just kind of introduce yourself and what you do and all the exciting events in your life?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, how much time do you have for that one? Oh, man.
I know, right?
Well, I mean, my name's Emily, so I am a sex coach primarily, but I also do a lot of work with polyamory and kink education, and a lot of my work centralizes around dismantling shame and stigmatization that tend to come from non-monogamous and kinky relationships, because there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of discontent surrounding these relationship styles, even though they've been around for so fucking long. So a lot of the work that I do is just having clients open up about what they're feeling within these relationships, how they've gotten into them, and working through dismantling a lot of the self-induced shame that tends to come with it, like, jealousy and, a a lot of
Sure.
other things as well.
Stuff which we can get into. But awesome. My name is Brad. For those that are logging on to me, I am a life coach. I specialize in religious deconstruction and helping people that are either beginning it or going through it or ending it and looking to set new goals, boundaries, and basically reclaim their life from that which was taken from them. And so I'm happy to be here with Emily. I've long wanted to get her on IG Live, and so here we go with that. So, Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background with religion and your deconstruction process?
Okay, so I actually grew up in a very Christian household. Don't ask me which branch of Christianity because I do not know it for the life of me. But my entire family was very Christian to this day. I have like a lot of conservative Christian family members that I do not talk to. I have no idea what I do for work. I think they still think I'm a personal trainer. I have no clue, but I'm like, nope, you're never gonna know. But I grew up in the church specifically. You know, my sister was in church choir, my mother was in church choir. I went every single Sunday until I went to college, so probably about 17, 18, around there, and you know, did the whole 9 yards. But just never really aligned with it. You know, even from a young age, I never really felt truly called into a religious sphere. And even now, like I'm much more like I'm a very spiritual person, but it's a lot more body grounding and a lot more elementals than it is actual religions. I was just talking about this with my partner on a dog walk, but we were talking about my discontent about performative you know, like performative groups. And I find that the Christian church is just like this huge performative, like checking a box of like your good deed for the week. And I don't like it. And so my deconstruction started when I realized that I just didn't align with a lot of the values within the Christian church itself. And I hated getting up early every Sunday to go to mass. I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't like it. I didn't like it. So, I mean, but also I was like 16. So I was just like, really? I want to sleep in on Sundays? What are you guys doing? But anyway, so my deconstruction really started when I actually started like questioning my beliefs and was really like, well, do I really believe all of what the church is telling me? Do I really believe in these different aspects that they're trying to feed me? You know, do I believe in what they think that a righteous person is versus who I think a righteous person is? And like, you know, even now, you know, a lot of the things that I do and the ways that I speak and the actions that I take, I'm like, Christian church wouldn't think that I am a righteous person, but I believe that I'm a righteous person. So like,
Right.
where does that line draw? So it was mostly just a lot of questioning, a lot of self-discovery.
Was there a certain point that you came to and said, yeah, I'm out of this, a certain event or anything?
It wasn't necessarily an event, but so I have a brother who's 9 years older than me, and so when he went to college, his parents let him. I mean, wow, my parents let him decide whether he wanted to still go to mass or not, and he was about 18 by this point, and he decided to opt out of going to mass, and my parents were very supportive of that. So for me, that was always like this benchmark time where I was like, okay, as soon as I go to college, I can stop going to mass. And so to me, that was kind of like this benchmark moment of like, this is when I was like claiming it to my parents, who I was just like, absolutely not, like not doing this anymore. Because mind you, like my father was the one who told me that I should have a priest at my wedding just in case so
Yeah.
that I can stay in the good graces of God. I wish I was kidding. And so, like, I told him, I was like, no, I think I'll just have like a friend officiate. You know, we'll do it like outside. And he's like, you should have a priest present just in case. And I'm like, absolutely. I'm like, no, Dad, no, absolutely. What? No. So, it was Christmas Mass after my freshman year of college, where I told my parents, I mean, worst timing ever. I told my parents on Christmas Eve that I was not going to Christmas Mass, and was probably hands down one of the biggest fights that I've had with my mother to date,
Yeah.
because she just didn't believe me. She was like, that's a funny joke. Like, go get dressed. You're going to Mass. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm going to stay home with my brother. I'm not going to Mass. And so it was a very definitive time. It was like the first time that I was like really standoffish with my parents, and I was just like, I'm not doing this anymore. But you know, I had been joking with my dad for a while before that, how we were just like, you know, he was going to mass kind of just like to check the box to say like, okay, God, I did it. And I went along with it because I just wanted to placate my parents. But I had been telling him for months before that like I didn't really want to go and I didn't really vibe with it anymore. But there wasn't any like big moment for me personally that was like I no longer agree with the church. It was just a big moment where I'm like I no longer go to church.
Okay. Okay. And how have your parents with all this now? Not going to church.
Well, my mom doesn't like it, and it's mostly, I mean, because like I think it's very hypocritical because my mother has also had her own falling outs with the church, and she stopped going for a while, and now
Right.
she's gone back. Even like even like without COVID going on, like she had stopped going to church for a while before that. So I know that when I started not going and like started renouncing Christianity, that she was just not for it. But I think like with most things in my life, she's kind of adopted like this don't ask, don't tell policy.
Okay.
So she's just like stop. Like I've never expressly told her that I identify now as atheist instead of Christian, but she knows like I've definitely had conversations with her about energy works and body healing because that's what I more vibe with now. And I don't know whether she's actually taken to that because she won't tell me, but I also don't want to ask. So,
Right. Right. So let me ask you this. Okay. In your profession, what are the biggest challenges people face coming out of religion, trying to embrace their sexuality that you've experienced?
there's a lot of shame surrounding it, and there's a lot of stigma, like we're supposed to have sex for pleasure, but Christianity, or like a lot of facets of Christianity, will pose sex for procreation, and that's it, right? We're not supposed to derive pleasure from sex and from bodily autonomy, and so bodily anatomy, technically. Well, I mean, autonomy too, whatever. It's fine. I didn't have enough coffee yet today, so I'm
Sure.
going to trip over my words a little bit. But, so it's mostly just the dismantling of shame and just understanding like, hey, like, you can touch yourself, like you can have sex and enjoy it. You can have sex with someone that you're not deeply in love with. Like you can go for it just for the fun of it. Because that's like the number one thing that I'll tell people like coming from this sort of from like a religious background. And I'm just like, you can literally do it just because you want to, like just because you're craving it, just because you want to have fun with someone. Like it doesn't have to be like the means to an end, or it doesn't have to be because you're in love with someone. Like it can, and that's a beautiful moment and a beautiful time, and we need to cherish it. But it's not the only reason. It's not the only way. And so that's why like the transition into kink has been really interesting too, because like that's an entirely different facet of sex and sexuality. And so, being able to take that transition and helping people through that transition is amazing.
So say that I'm someone that is struggling with shame.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, okay, and I'm looking to explore my own sexuality. All right. Um, can you give me a practical step of maybe what you offer a little bit of how I can start to reprogram my mind with that, or what are some steps I could take?
Yeah. So the first thing that we have to do is identify it,
Hmm.
right? Because a lot of times shame feels like this very pervasive emotion. It's very similar to jealousy, but shame has triggers, right? Just like
Right.
jealousy has triggers. And so if we can identify what has triggered that shame, then we can actually start to dismantle it. So like for me, like a personal experience that I didn't actually start masturbating and self-pleasuring until I was about 24. I want to say it's very recent
Yeah.
because of all of these tie-ins with my background and in relation to like different toxic exes that I've had before in the past. But it was mostly religious background where I felt bad about searching for this sort of bodily pleasure even with myself. So what I had to do was first identify where that shame was coming from. And I was like, okay, like why do I feel bad about this? Why am I stopping myself? Why does this feel wrong? And like keep asking, they're called probing questions, right? So we keep asking ourselves these questions over and over and keep getting down into a deeper version of why until we come down to that root, right? So for me, the shame root was that I felt like I was a bad person because I wanted to seek pleasure in this way. because I had never done it before and because it felt wrong and because I had been taught by my family and specifically by my parents that it's not something that I should be seeking out, right?
Yeah.
And so once I identified that root, I was like, oh, okay, now we can start to create a new identity and a new truth. So instead of thinking that this is bad, every time that it came up or that urge would come up, I'd say, no, this is okay. It's okay. It's good and you're safe. And I just keep telling myself that over and over and over again. And honestly, I hired a coach to help me with it as well, because there's only so much we can do when we're presented with shame triggers, because shame is, again, like, it's a very pervasive thought. It's like this giant fucking wave. So like we need to, a lot of times we'll need to have someone on the sidelines to just be like, hey, it's not that bad. Like, this is okay. You're allowed to feel this way. It's like giving yourself permission. But we have to give ourselves permission for how we're feeling. And then we have to give ourselves permission to shift into that new truth. And the new truth is something that we'll just consistently tell ourselves over and over and over and over and over again. Like, there are even still some moments now where I have to tell myself this new truth, because I'm like, those shames will start to creep back up again. They come in just less frequently,
Right.
but they'll still come up, right? So a lot of the work that I do with my clients is just identifying where that shame is coming from. Because it might be from a past partnership, it might be from a different religious background, it might be from parents. A lot of it's from parents, a lot of it's from family. So because we take their generational traumas and we bring it on with us. But in most layman terms, it's identifying the root, creating a new truth, and then reinforcing that new truth as an unconscious truth, so that becomes our new identity.
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing. I wish I would have met someone like you when I was a teenager, because I was very shame driven, and anytime I would pleasure myself or masturbate, I always felt incredible, immense guilt,
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming shame. There'd be prayers of confessing, and I won't do it again, and then I do it again. And there was this constant cycle of
Yep.
of shame, really. And
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I would have had somebody speak in my life like you just did, to say, hey, listen, it's not shameful, it's natural. But I was so engrossed within the church,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that I couldn't see that. And just like you said, the church says, hey, you are not to even touch yourself or explore or anything. It's all bad. It's all evil. So, with that being said, I know I veered a little bit off the question just because it's so fascinating what you're saying. So I hope you'll bear with me on this. Say, I know that you have a lot going on with your coaching, and would you mind just kind of sharing a little bit about what you do with your coaching? Some things coming up. I'm excited because I've looked at your webpage and I've kind of explored, and I want everyone else to know what kind of services and help there is out there for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, right now I'm actually hosting a masterclass next Monday about communication. So because a lot of my work centers around non-monogamy and kink, it is a lot of communicative aspects within a kink dynamic. However, it's still really good for people who don't identify with either one of those, because we'll be going over the background, the backbones of having like an actual true conversation and how to foster empathy when we're speaking with a partner. So that's going to be happening on Monday. I'm very excited about that, just because it's going to be so jam-packed with information. It's set to be an hour. It might go longer. I tend to ramble, if y'all haven't fucking noticed. So like,
Love it.
I'm very excited about that. Other than that, I do take on private clients, but not very many, because of the fact that a lot of my business centers in community work. So I do a lot of training within different submissives within kink culture. And so we're opening up for the second round of my what's called Subspace. So it's a program specifically for submissives around Thanksgiving. And then by the end of this month, I'm going to be opening up a new high intensive mastermind for kink dynamics specifically, so that we can work on communication and jealousy and, setting into dynamics in a way that isn't readily talked about, again, because of shame that happens through all of these dynamics, even just on dating apps themselves. The amount of people that come to me that are just like, I have this thing and I'm really nervous about it. And I'm like, you don't have to be nervous about it. Like, you can talk to me about it. It's totally fine. And just like, but anyway, that's a whole different, my adventures on dating apps is totally different. We need a whole other live for that one.
Okay.
And so it's mostly a lot of community programs, but everything is in my bio and my Instagram. So, or you guys can just DM me for a whole bunch of different, because I'm very bad about talking what I do.
Okay, so you, in that one little tidbit you gave of what you do, there's a lot going on, okay?
There
But
is.
that's something I want to make sure all of our viewers understand, okay? And first of all, I'd like to say the Informal Mystic Blair said, yes, church equals, participation equals shame, definitely around sex, but most things, which I definitely agree. So let me ask you this. You mentioned sub dom, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Give us clarity in defining those two terms for us.
Yeah, so in any sort of kink dynamic, there's going to be, it's essentially it's a power dynamic, right? So you have the dominating power and the submissive power. The dominant is going to be, so first to clarify that these roles they're non-gender. So these roles can be literally anything. It could be female to female, male, female, female, male, like whatever you want to do with it. Like, that's what the beauty of kink as well is, that you essentially create your own rules within these dynamics. But there is always these two different structures of the dominant, who essentially like sets the rules and sets the precedents for the dynamic, and then the submissive, who will surrender to the dominant and be the one to follow the rules or not follow the rules like I do, and get upset and get punished by that. But it's essentially one taking care of the other one. So a dynamic is going to foster a lot of safety, trust, open communication, and whatnot, because we have to make sure that both the dominant and the submissive feel seen and heard within the dynamic. However, the dominant is the one that is essentially dominating over the submissive.
Okay, and
In like the most layman of terms.
now I also noticed that you're talking about being a submissive.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that you're powerless.
No, it does not.
Yeah, would you explain how the submissive still maintains power?
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting, because the submissive actually has more power within the relationship. And that's how you can really start to discern the people who are actually in the lifestyle and have been in a while, and those who have like seen someone be called daddy in porn and are just like, I want to try that. Because of the fact that we are fostering this safety and this trust and this empathy between two people, the submissive is the one who sets the limits within the relationship, essentially, right? So during the scene, they'll be able to say, like, no, stop, or like, you've reached this limit, this is all I can take. And the dominant, or a good ethical dominant, is going to listen to that. An unethical or even a predatory dominant is going to take that power away from the sub without their consent. But in a true dynamic, we have consent for every single method along the way. And so the sub is normally the one who's giving the consent to the dominant, not always, but most times. And so the sub also has the power to take away that consent at any point in time. So that's why we want to, so like we want to make sure that we're staying safe, and we're staying trusted, and we're staying open, because if the sub no longer feels safe, they're going to take away that consent and take the power away from the dominant.
Okay, so that being said, I imagine there has to be an awful lot of communication that takes place before this ever happens. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. So it really depends. So within a kink dynamic, you can have either what's called a 24/7 dynamic, which is that the dominant and submissive are within these roles constantly. It is very exhaustive. I have never been in a 24/7 dynamic, because it's not something that I would actually vibe with. but there are a lot of people who do it, and there are a lot of people who do it correctly. And then there are those who just kind of like fall into that role, right? You can almost think of it like a play, because the dominant and submissive roles a lot of times are roles. Now, for me, I get a lot of my power from my submission, and I use what I've learned through scenes and through dynamics in my everyday life, but I'm not a typical like get down on my knees and say daddy sub in most things that I do throughout my day, right? And
Right.
so a lot of times it's called a pre-scene consult, where we'll have conversations between dom and sub before an actual scene takes place, or before, you go and meet up again, where you say like, okay, what's going on for you? How are you feeling today? This is what I want to do. Are you okay with that? And then you go in that way. And you can also like kind of break character sometimes even during a scene to say like, hey, that didn't vibe with me. I really need to have a conversation with you about such and such. And then that way you can open up conversation that way.
So it's not like 50 Shades of Grey is what I'm hearing.
No. Oh God, no. That if you want to know about like what not to do, you can go read 50 Shades of Grey. Like it's like a running joke in the kink community. We're just like, it's like 50 Shades of Grey, right? Like, my God, no. I think the only thing he did right was like create a pre-scene, like a pre-dynamic contract, which a lot of people actually do. Sometimes it's better
Right.
to have a lot of things in writing, but even shouldn't even fucking read it. So I'm
Yeah.
like, really? What? No. Like even his dungeon was bad. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Like fucking hilarious. And like but what's really upsetting even about that is because like that's the sort of media representation that kink gets a lot of times. And
Right.
I've heard that the only really good kink representation is in the show Billions, I think it. No, what? It's either no, I think it is Billions. Yeah, where
That,
the male is submissive to his female partner. But don't hold me to it because I'm not entirely sure. I can come back and like check in later, but like there's like very, very few, because 9 times out of 10 we get these faux domineering non-consenting doms from popular culture and medias. It is Billions. Haha, I knew it. Okay,
yeah.
great.
Clearly.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. So, but 9 times out of 10, that's the sort of representation that we get. Um, and so it's very, very upsetting, because now we spend a lot of time just like dismantling everything that, like all of these preconceived notions, and then having to educate 9 times out of 10. So it's a dismantle, it's like dismantling, accepting, educating. And I'm like, all the fucking time. It's like so exhausting. It's exhausting.
I bet. So we had a question by 4th Avenue, 9th Street. Says, this might sound stupid. It's not stupid. But what do you mean by kink?
Okay, so we'll go back to the most basic of terms. So kink is a power dynamic between two people, the dominant and the submissive, which we just talked about. And kink is literally, so when you think of kink, a lot of times it's like that taboo sort of sex relations, or even not, it doesn't even have to be sex relations, honestly. It's just those taboo relations that people tend to either feel shame about, or others have inflicted shame upon, right? So there are like harsher kinks. So you can think about, some of my harsher kinks are like degradation and impact play, being in pain, what have you. Being called a slut is like really great for me. Like I love it so constantly, but it's seen as like the shadow side almost, because a lot of times kink is deriving pleasure from where it's most people derive pain, if that, and like
Yeah.
psychological, emotional, physical pain, any sort of pain. But kink is essentially like taking pleasure from what most people will not take pleasure in. And so it's not for everyone, and that's okay. And I think that's the other big conception, is just like everyone feels like they either have to be okay with it or have to not be. But it was like, it's not one size fits all, right? Like everyone's feeling a little different, and everyone's going to have these different dynamics within it. And so sometimes people really vibe with it and sometimes they don't. And that's really okay. And like accepting that you might not be on that spectrum is like one of the biggest things that we can do, right? Just acknowledging that it exists, and then also acknowledging, be like, hey, that's not really for me. I don't really like it. And then you say, okay, cool, that's great.
All right. Now we got more questions based upon what you were just talking about. Okay.
Yes.
Blair asked, is it always a power dynamic? What about like a foot fetish or something? To which 4th Avenue, 9th Street said, yeah, my question as well. Um, it, can it be things outside of subdom? That was my confusion.
Uh-huh.
What are your thoughts?
So a kink dynamic is 9 times out of 10 going to have that dominant submissive role because it is a power dynamic. However, you can have BDSM style play, in which case that would encompass more of just like those harsher sort of play styles, right? Because BDSM is bondage, dominant submissive, sadomasochism, and the D stands for something else, and I can't. Discipline, maybe. I don't know. The D stands for one other thing, and
Okay.
I can't remember it. And so BDSM. So that's like the main difference here, right? Is that kink envelops BDSM. BDSM does not necessarily envelop kink. So kink are those shadow selves and those shadow desires. BDSM is the actual form of play. So in a foot fetish or any sort of more raunchy style play, you don't necessarily have to have like, the dom commanding the sub to stick their foot in their face. You can literally just have someone who really, really enjoys feet and having another person be like, okay, I'll submit to you. You can go play with my feet for a little bit. And so that would be a form of BDSM style play. Whereas kink is 9 times out of 10 going to be a power dynamic between two people or more than two people, technically.
Fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So obviously terminology is very important
Yes.
with this. I love how clear you are on defining those. I'm sure you've had a lot of practice defining those. Obviously, you're a coach in that area as well, but your personal life. And I also love how open you are with your personal life. The examples used on her page. If you haven't followed Emily on her page, Coach _Emily with 2 Y's at the end, you need to go and do that because the information she continually puts out is vital to making sure that your kinks or your sub dom, all those elements work together. And she's very big on communication as well. So I think that's what I appreciate most about you and your page and what you do is it's like there's no such thing as over communication. That is so vital and important, or else people get hurt. So let me ask this question for you, if you don't mind. What what are some, because you mentioned that you obviously do seminars and classes and stuff like that. What are some, if someone was looking to come in and say, hey, I have a kink, what kind of kinks fall into your classes? Like, give us an example of kinks that show up in your classes.
Oh, so I try not to discriminate against kinks. The only thing that I will discriminate against are people who put their kinks in or who will try to what's called trauma dumping. And
Mm.
especially like kink can be very trauma informed. So we want to make sure that there is consent first, even within a masterclass setting, even within a client and coach setting, like what I have with my clients. And so there's no discrimination upon kinks, but there is a hard limit between people who will decide to dump their kinks onto me or dump their traumas onto me or to any of my clients without having expressed conversations beforehand and gaining consent from everyone present. So I tried not to discern between different kinks, but I have gotten a bunch of people who are into all different kinds of things. There's people who are into knife and blood play. There's people who are into breeding kinks. There's people who really like pee, which I'm like, good for you, not for me, but good for you. People who like spit, people who like cum play, like anything. Like if you think of it, like they're in my audience somewhere. And I've actually done like different like invasive stories where I'm just like, here, drop your kinks here, guys, and like the amount of responses that I have gotten from people in just like every corner of the world. Like there's people who are really into age play. There's people who are really into impact play like I am. there's a lot of people who are sadomasochistic, just like I am. And it's just like, it's very fun. I've had clients who joke, they're just like, yeah, brats bring in brats, and like the more people who are like you are going to come onto your page. And I'm like, that's very true, but I didn't expect so many sadomasochists in my audience. Where did you all come from? So
Okay.
but literally any kink from like any corner is going to congregate at some point.
Can you give me an example of trauma dumping? I've
Yes.
heard of that before, so I think that's really fascinating.
Yes. So trauma dumping is essentially, so like, I'm a firm believer that we have all gone through something that has like some form of hardship. The trauma dumping is talking about your hardships to someone without getting their express permission first, right? It's why we put trigger warnings on things, because a lot of times, if people are triggered or they're upset or they have traumas that are like on the same realm as you, but they haven't processed theirs yet, they're not going to have enough of a mind in order to actually be able to hold space and empathy for you while you talk about it. And instead, you're just going to make them feel bad because you are now projecting your thoughts and your emotions onto their unsolved traumas. And then it just creates this whole whirlwind of anxiety or depression or PTSD or whatever it is for the person that you are communicating with. So anytime to prevent trauma dumping, if you're in written word, we put a trigger warning. If it is like speaking, if I was speaking to you, like a lot of times what I've done for people or what I've done with new partners, I say like, hey, I have these past experiences, but they border on assault. Is that something that you are open and can actually handle hearing about? And then they can tell me yes or no. And if they say no, I'd be like, okay, well, that's totally fine. But like, we can't move forward until you know these things. So if there's any way that I can hold space for you so that we can process it and we can talk about it. But if they say yes, then I say, okay, and start moving through really slowly so that at any point in time, they can say, okay, this is my limit. I've had enough. I can't handle it anymore.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So what I'm hearing, which is really important, I think, for everybody, is being a sexpert like yourself and dealing with um, your clientele, if you will, or people exploring their sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot. I think when people hear sexpert, they think, okay, it's all about the physical. And what I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is it's more tied into the mental, the psyche, the emotional, all of those things that make a person who they are.
Yeah.
More so than even just the physical. I know the physical, I'm sure, has its part, but all of these other things have to be in line for it to be
Mm-hmm.
successful with
Yeah.
the subdom structure.
Yeah, it is. I mean, well, if you think about like a partnership or even the dynamic, because all a dynamic is a partnership with like a little extra spice to it. 9 times out of 10, like we're not going to get along with our partner unless we meet them on an emotional and a mental level, right? And even if you want to think about sex, I always like to say is 95% mental and 5% physical. And even then, the physical attributes, like our body can have a turn on response while our mentality isn't there.
Right.
And then in that same way, are we really enjoying ourselves? Are we really actually getting turned on by the things that we're experiencing? Or is our body just having that reaction because it's our natural response? Whereas our mentality isn't actually there. But then again, if you're anxious, if you're stressed, if you haven't been sleeping well, like you're not going to have a good time. You're not going to orgasm anyway. So all of these mental aspects and attributes lead to having a good sex life. It's
Gotcha.
why the number one question men specifically ask me is how to last longer in bed. And I'm like, I don't know, have you gone to therapy yet? Because like if you're stressed, it's not gonna work, but dude, but like that's a whole different conversation. But point being is that yes, so like a lot of the work that I do, and when I talk to people about what I do, I essentially equate it to talk sex therapy because we follow these same protocols of like working through a lot of mental and emotional ailments that you are going to be holding on to, and then working through bodily traumas, and then you can actually start to have really good dynamics and really good sex.
Wow. Yeah. I makes complete sense. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I need to go to counseling or something. So that's awesome. You are a wealth of information. I wanted to give our audience just a couple minutes. If there's a question you have for Emily, please let us know in the chat below. Uh, I, I don't. I mean, I have 5 bazillion questions, but I'm not going to bombard you with all those questions because this is all just a new area for me. Because as you know, I mean, I was a pastor for 20, uh, and so and getting out of the church and leaving that behind. It's like all these different um, um, things are coming up that I've never explored.
Hmm.
And ever
Yeah.
thought, because I was in that little Christian bubble, if you will. And there's another life out there. I'm walking around like, oh my goodness, there's so much here, and it's really really cool to hear it explained so well and so ethically.
Thank
I
you.
same time. Okay, so you have a question from Fourth Avenue Street. It says, "What made you want to get into this work?"
So it was actually by accident. Not gonna lie. So I was a coach for about I want to say about 4 years before that, but I was a powerlifting coach for Equinox. And so what ended up happening was at the beginning of the pandemic, like I mentioned earlier, like I was moving through a lot of bodily and emotional shame and trauma from past abusive relationships. And so or actually someone that I used to work with at Equinox had become a sexologist herself. And so she was running like a special on a program. So I joined it at the beginning of the pandemic. So I was like, well, we're stuck inside all damn time. Like I might as well do some work on myself. And this was last March. And then just fell so completely in love with this work because I saw such incredible transformation within just 2 months, I think it was. And so after that, I started doing my own research. I started exploring more. I started doing a lot more self-discovery. And that led me to opening my current partnership with my anchor partner. And so when I started dating outside of our partnership, the first person that I started dating was a sadistic dom. And so he asked me if I had ever played with rope before, I'd ever been tied up. And I said, no, I haven't. Oh my God. And he just like looks me dead in the face. It's like, do you want to? And I was like, yeah, actually, I really do. And the rest was fucking history. Like by that point, like we were together for a couple of months, so we did a lot more play together. And then I'm like a student by nature. So as soon as I like entered into this world even a little bit, I was like, I have to do all of the research that I ever possibly fucking can, and just like got
Right.
my hands on books and different accounts and just like real, like real world, I don't want to say accounts again, but real world accounts of people who were in the lifestyle as well. And it just led me to one discovery after another, after another, after another.
Awesome. Well, I hope that. But that's really. I love that you just once you start to dive in or pull on that string, you want to learn more
Yeah.
about it. I'm similar like that. It's like, oh, what is this? I'll follow this to the bitter end.
Oh yeah, you fall down that rabbit hole and you're like, well, I'm in this now. Like,
Yeah.
okay. And like it didn't help that at the time too. I mean, it did technically that I was able to, because of the fact that I was freely dating by that point, and this was like I want to say August of last year. So like the COVID in New York wasn't like it was on like a downswing. So a lot of things were opening back up again, which is why my partner and I started dating. So it was just like, oh, okay, like, as long as we're careful and what have you. And so I was able to meet up consistently with a whole different stream of types of dominance and was able to like really sit into this play like so much more expressly and just like actual, because there's a difference between like just reading about it and actually experiencing it. So it's kind of like, you're in class, then you go on a field trip and you're like, wow, this is amazing. It's like literally, it was like I was going on a field trip like every single weekend because I was just like, oh, this is amazing. But not even that, just like being on apps and like having these conversations over and over and over and over and over again, like it helped to finally be able to be like, oh, this is how you do it, and this is how I teach other people how to do it, this is how you have a conversation effectively, like this is how you find a right person, and like started just experimenting with it to the point that I was actually able to start coaching it.
Awesome. Okay, so we have another question came in. It's the shame around. It's from Oh, hey, it's Melissa. The shame around sex and sexually and sexually runs so deep because of my religious upbringing, and I feel so stuck. Any advice, resources that you'd recommend?
So, for shame specifically, anything on Brene Brown is going to, anything by Brene Brown technically is going to be fantastic for you. She's a shame researcher herself, so being able to dismantle shame, like she talks about it extensively, and she has so many different books. So you're going to be able to find one that you like. I don't remember the titles of most of them, but she also has a podcast. So if you want to just listen to her fantastical text and drawl, it's amazing. And the work she does is fantastic. It's actually how I got into doing a lot of my work around shame itself. But like we talked about in the beginning of this live, and I don't know if you're here for it, Melissa, but what I would recommend for you to do is that because we have such a broad scope here where you say that there's shame around sex because of religion, and we're like, okay, we understand that, and that's like that nice big blanket statement, but what aspects of religion we're shaming for you and what aspects of sex feel shamed, right? Maybe sex with your partner is really fine, but maybe self masturbation is self pleasure is the thing that's getting you the most. Maybe it's you actually opening up and enjoying sex with your partner. Maybe it's you going out and having sex with someone else when you're not partnered. So like asking yourself these questions and saying like, okay, where is this shame stemming from and in what aspects of it, so that you can start to rewrite those truths. And that's what we talked about before, is like identifying that shame trigger. That way you can then accept, be like, okay, this was my last truth and it was fine up until this point, but is no longer my truth anymore. And then you get the power to rewrite that truth into something that's actually conducive for you. So that would be my advice to you. And if you need any help with that work, please just DM me and then we could talk about it together and move forward from there. Because it is sticky and you're going to face a lot of upheaval. You're going to face a lot of difficulty with it. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I promise you, I've done the same exact work before. It's just always like it's going to be this constant battle. And so having a partner there to actually help you through it is going to be insurmountable.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, we're going to wrap this up. I feel like we could talk all day about this because I know there's other areas we have not even gone into at all, or even come close to touching. So I want to thank you. I'd love to have you back again. We can talk about that in different areas. But I want to thank all of our listeners and viewers today, and those that are going to watch this later. Please go to Emily's page and check her content out. It is dynamic, and she does such a professional job with what she is doing. And she's one I follow religiously because I'm always learning from her and what she has to say. So, Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate taking the time in the midst of all the busyness that you have going on.
It's okay. It was a nice reprieve. I like sitting down and talking. It's like my favorite thing to do, but
Well,
it's fine. I have a home goods date later, so it
there you
doesn't stop.
go. All right. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.